Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather, and we're headed toward the inauguration of President Trump. And in order to facilitate what our interpretation here is of what's going on, broadly speaking, at the Republican Professor podcast, is I'm going to revisit something from John Yoo. John Yoo was one of the first big shot guests that we had on the Republican Professor back in 2022. I'm sure you remember that. And John uh, wrote this book, Defender in Chief. We talked about it on the podcast. It's about Trump's first term. It's a fantastic book. John, I follow him on LinkedIn. Um, And he wrote something that I think is worth sharing here. And today is 20 November 2024, just a little bit over 2 weeks after the polls closed in the 2024 election. Um, John writes in National Review why an Attorney General Matt Gaetz would backfire on Trump. Now, John is not a never Trumper. He has written this book, Defender in Chief, defending Donald Trump. He teaches at the University of California at Berkeley, okay? The People's Republic of Berkeley. And he's writing this book. If you don't know, that's like defending Adam Smith in Moscow in 1960, okay? But I think this is worth talking about because it it's not just what he says here, it's some deeper principles of constitutionalism that I think need to be brought before your mind for this entire 4 years that's going to be in front of us, okay? So bear with me here. John wrote this, published it November 20th today, 6:30 a.m. And I don't see the post on LinkedIn that he but this is the kind of thing I'm seeing on LinkedIn. President Trump would not be well served by having an attorney general who is preoccupied for a year or more with his own fate. Now pay attention specifically to the constitutional provisions of Article 2, which creates the presidency as we discuss this, because we're going to make a fair use of this material. It's going to be a transformative reading. We're going to discuss it. I'm going to comment on it. Okay. So in nominating Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, President-elect Trump has signaled his support for radical change at the Justice Department. I'm just going to read it, okay? As former DOJ attorneys, we do not doubt that the nation's premier federal law enforcement agency would benefit from a significant reform, but by proposing a nominee as unqualified and as troubled as Gaetz, Trump would frustrate the very forces of reform that he would unleash. I stopped sharing my screen because there are some I cannot avoid the commercial stuff going on here, and I don't want to I don't want to do any commercial stuff here because there's ads and stuff on this. I can't get rid of them. The roadblock blocks to Trump's agenda would grow even more difficult if the returning president were to resort to an unprecedented, untested theory of appointing Gaetz without Senate approval. a gambit that would plunge the DOJ into a political and legal quagmire. The DOJ's fall began with the FBI's 2016 efforts to investigate Donald Trump for allegedly, I'll share this part because there's no ads. For alleged ties to Russia and culminated in special counsel Jack Smith's failure to drive Trump off the 2024 ballot. The Biden-Garland DOJ has pursued an agenda to divide Americans based on race and gender. See its defense of racial quotas in college admissions and its effort to force states to use race in drawing voting districts. It has sought to suppress free debate and discussion, such as the FBI's efforts to coerce social media to censor, quote, misinformation, unquote. And it has applied the law in ways that appear clearly biased. For example, in failing to protect churches and pro-life clinics from vandalization from pro-abortion extremists. There are few reasons to nominate Gaetz to face the daunting challenge of reforming the nation's most powerful law enforcement agency. But there are also bad reasons to oppose him. Okay, now pay attention here. Among the bad reasons is the complaint that, okay, we got an ad, so I'm not sharing my screen anymore. It doesn't matter how many times I click out of that ad, it still pops back up. Among the bad reasons is the complaint that Gaetz is a, quote, Trump loyalist, unquote. A president has every right to expect his attorney general and indeed all his appointees to be loyalists. Okay, the only thing I would add here, guys, is the only thing I would add is I wouldn't say all his appointees. I would say all of his executive branch appointees. Because the only thing that you should expect from a judicial appointee is that they're loyal to the Constitution. They should not be loyal to the president as such. I think that's what they mean, though. I'm going to continue. Attorneys general do not enforce the law as if they were neutral judges without robes. An attorney general is inescapably a political appointee and serves at the will of the president. A president must make political choices, from interpreting the Constitution to allocating resources for fighting crime. In deciding how to fulfill his constitutional responsibility to, quote, take care the laws be faithfully executed. I think that's worth sharing right there, that language there from the Constitution. Now let's reflect on that. Let's reflect on this paragraph right here. Sorry, I can't get rid of this ad. I don't know I don't know what to do here. I'm sorry. Just focus up here, all right? Attorneys general do not enforce the law as if they were neutral judges without robes. An attorney general is inescapably a political appointee and serves at the will of the president. A president must make political choices, from interpreting the Constitution to allocating resources for fighting crime. These are scarce resources, they're not infinite. In deciding how to fulfill his constitutional responsibility to, quote, take care the laws be faithfully executed. Take care the laws be faithfully executed. That is the president's constitutional responsibility. It's in the Constitution. So now we don't like it when Democrats appoint an attorney general that is a political appointee that interprets the Constitution wrong in such a way, they interpret the Constitution in such a way to undermine the Constitution. Well, that just means their interpretation is wrong, and that goes to the importance of elections. I would highly recommend you reflect on that. So, I mean, reflect deeply on this stuff. So I'm looking at the Constitution right now, and Article 2 in this, we had Charles Kessler on the podcast. He was my Federalist Papers professor. Article 2 is about 3 or 4 pages in a novel-like Signet Classic edition like this one is. And, you could read it in less than 5 minutes. And you might have to read some of it twice. But there's these he shall and he may, and these are the powers and duties of the president. He shall take care the laws be faithfully executed is in Article 2, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. He shall take care the laws be faithfully executed. Who? Well, Article 2, Section 1 vests the entire executive power in one person. Not two, not three, one. It says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America, period. He, that's singular. It's also gender neutral, as we've covered ad nauseum. He shall. The president is the one that is in charge of enforcing the law. The president is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States in the federal sense. Matt Gaetz, if he's confirmed, works for Trump. Now, what happens if the so-called deep state is so perverse and so filled with problems that need to be not only exposed but solved, that you have all these bureaucratic hurdles and you need to get somebody that is radically loyal to the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, the president. In other words, you need somebody that would not be confirmed by the Senate, because the Senate isn't going to confirm somebody that is as radical as you need. What about that? That's what John is getting to. And I'm interpreting John this way, John Yoo here. Because of the sensitivity of this duty, we continue. Show you where I'm at. Because of the sensitivity of this duty, many presidents have chosen loyal friends and allies as Attorney General. FDR and Robert Jackson. John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy, whose son, by the way, is now in the Trump administration. Ronald Reagan and his longtime associates, William French Smith and Ed Meese. Barack Obama and his close friend, Eric Holder. Nor is it a valid objection that Gaetz is a controversial and outspoken advocate of the MAGA movement, or that he is a firebrand who led the insurrection of the House Republicans against ousted Speaker Kevin McCarthy. For those who supported Trump, these may be desirable qualities. The real problem with Gaetz's nomination is that there are unanswered fundamental questions about his character and fitness for the office. Gaetz stands accused of statutory rape and sex trafficking. To be sure, the DOJ did not file these charges after investigating them, though it has convicted several of his associates who also appear to have been involved. But the House Ethics Committee has also investigated the accusations, and that committee was on the point of issuing a report of its findings when Gaetz's nomination and ensuing resignation from Congress intervened. Although House Speaker Mike Johnson has expressed a desire to keep the report confidential, he does not control its disclosure, which is the prerogative of the Ethics Committee itself. And at this point, it looks as if the committee may well release the report, even though it is said to be incomplete, at least to the Senate. In any case, it's highly unlikely that the Senate would confirm Gaetz without seeing it. In the past, the Senate Judiciary Committee has opposed nominees who refused access to their executive branch files, for example. Unless the House report clears Gaetz, the Senate will not and should not confirm him. If the Attorney General is to overhaul the Justice Department in the radical manner that Trump and the voters expect, he cannot perform his duties with his credibility already significantly damaged. Deporting illegal aliens who have engaged in sex trafficking has, rightly, been a signature issue for President Trump. This cause would not be served by an attorney general who former House colleagues believed had committed the same offense. Gaetz's legitimacy will be further undermined if he enters office through a legally dubious route. Now, this is what I want you to focus on. As the chances that the Senate will confirm Gaetz diminish, Trump might try to make an end run around the Senate and install Gaetz through a recess appointment. Such an attempt would probably be far more damaging to the administration than merely letting the Senate reject Gaetz's nomination. This is interesting. Now listen to this, because this is a deep point about process, okay? Excuse me. According to Article 2 of the Constitution, the president shall have the power to fill up all vacancies, which may happen during the recess of the Senate until its next session, generally a period of 2 years. As Alexander Hamilton explained in Federal 76, the Senate advice and consent power acts as an excellent check upon a spirit of favoritism in the president and would operate to prevent, quote, the appointment of unfit characters from state prejudice, from family connection, from personal attachment, or from a view to popularity, unquote. Allowing the president to unilaterally appoint officers made more sense when the Senate was often not in session because senators traveled to the Capitol by horse and sail and communicated with hand-carried letters. More recently, presidents have resorted to recess appointments when partisan resistance has slowed appointments. Presidential frustration with the Senate's slow pace is understandable, and the incoming president obviously wants to hit the ground running. But the Senate has been able to protect its constitutional role in the appointments process by staying constantly in pro forma session, even when it has no scheduled votes. This is interesting. Little bit of process here. I'm going to share my screen here. Even when it has no scheduled votes or other business, a practice upheld by the Supreme Court in the 2014 Noel Canning case. Indeed, a recess appointment of Gaetz might even be unconstitutional under the reasoning of Justice Scalia's opinion in the Canning case, which was joined by 3 other conservative justices, Roberts, Thomas, and Alito. Scalia wrote that the recess appointment power is an anachronism. In Scalia's view, the president can make a valid recess appointment only between sessions of Congress, not within a single session. The Senate recess in which Gaetz would notionally be appointed is within a session, not between sessions. Resorting to a recess appointment is in any case a strange maneuver when the same party controls both the White House and Congress. The Republican Senate has every political incentive to consider Trump's nominees speedily, to which new Majority Leader John Thune has committed. But a recess appointment of Gaetz might rest on even more legally dubious grounds. According to press reports, Trump is considering invoking a never-used constitutional provision that allows the president to throw Congress into adjournment when the House and Senate themselves cannot agree when to go out of session. To trigger the president's power, the House would have to pass an adjournment of Congress that the Senate rejects. Trump could then adjourn Congress himself and appoint not just cabinet officers, but every nominee for whom Senate consent is required. The Senate has ample tools to strike back. It could immediately call itself back into session and end the recess. Gaetz's nomination would remain in limbo, and Trump would have succeeded only in antagonizing the Senate. The Senate could even go so far as to call up Gaetz's nomination and vote it down as a show of institutional independence. Gaetz would remain in office, but a Senate rejection of his, I'm going to share my screen again, a rare opportunity to share my screen without ads. Gaetz would remain in office, but a Senate rejection of his nomination would deprive him of any political legitimacy. Senate-confirmed inferior officers, such as the U.S. attorneys who oversee federal prosecutions in every state and every American city, major American city, might ads keep popping back up. Sorry. The U.S. attorneys might ignore Gaetz's commands with few political consequences. Okay, you don't want to be in a situation where that happens with Trump. See, this is what we're talking. This would be counterproductive. What you want is somebody whose commands are followed because they have the force. They have a political force behind them. And see, when you're Senate confirmed, that's supposed to be that political force to put pressure, bring pressure to bear from the people mediated through these institutions in the Constitution on the executive branch. And the whole point of the executive branch is that it's supposed to be accountable to the president. It's also accountable to the Senate. And these guys have a stake in this because their reputations are attached to this kind of thing as well. Okay. And the Senate, they're up for reelection and they need to consider their reputation. Okay. Where am I going with this? What I'm saying is if you don't have a mass popular support to rein in the executive branch, this is not going to work. You can't just have a radical guy that gets in there and fixes it and does it all. That's not how this works. He might be able to get some stuff started, but uh, there are enough tools in our constitutional system to fight back against that if the guy has problems otherwhere. If he's got some flanks that are not protected. Are you guys hearing this? Education is really important for the next generation. It's so important to get that groundswell of understanding of the design that the president is in charge of the executive branch. And that design just falls flat on its face if he can't appoint the right kind of people to bring to bear these priorities in a massive bureaucracy with these different moving parts, Congress involved, with staggered elections, different lengths of terms. And term limits are not going to solve it, people. In fact, term limits might actually hurt. I'm not going to get off into term limits because I've talked about it so much on this podcast. But briefly, the problem with term limits is you need enough institutional knowledge to fight back against the institution. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The institution will always have more knowledge, will always be ahead of yourself. If you get rid of term limits, you're getting rid of people that know these institutions. And you're just going to constantly be replacing them with people that have a very limited understanding of what they're up against. The problem with the way things are now, where people just keep getting reelected, is that there becomes an incentive to go along to get along, and maybe that incentive in many cases is more harmful than it would be with term limits. But the problems with term limits are bigger because you get a bunch of fresh voices in there and they don't know their butts from their elbows. They don't even know where their restroom is. They're not going to be able to fight back as well as you think they will. What I'm saying is there's no perfect solution here. And I happen to like the design of the founding. I happen to like that. I would like it if Trump could run for a third term. Why do we have term limits for president? That was not in the original design. We have term limits because FDR won 4 times, and that freaked even Democrats out. But the real problem is the American people. And that's something you cannot solve by appointing some radical guy. You can't solve that problem. A House that might have found Gaetz unfit to sit in Congress could find him unfit to sit in the executive branch and launch an impeachment investigation. Emboldened senators could use the fight over Gaetz to stall more nominations, even those to the judiciary, and delay other Trump priorities such as renewing tax cuts or boosting funding for border control. The fight over Gaetz could therefore upend the new administration's entire program. Boy, that is a sobering thought. See, now I don't want you to think this guy's a never Trumper. This is supportive of Trump here. And, you know, look, Gaetz he's a young guy and he's energetic and he's been in Congress and he's very good at the 5 minute, you know, gotcha stuff that Congress people are famous for because that's pretty much all they can do to get famous. Is ask these kind of questions and do the gotcha stuff in the little 5 minute that they have. Is that enough to run a huge department like this and be effective? He's got spunk. Give him that. He's got spunk. I know it's Trump's decision, and I respect that. And maybe Trump doesn't trust anybody else, and I respect that too. But the fight over Gaetz could therefore upend the new administration's entire program. It's possible because of pride. I'm not saying the president's pride. I'm saying just all along, the whole thing. I don't know what the answer is. Who else could possibly win Trump's approval? I don't know. And I do like the fact that Trump has people that he, like Bobby Kennedy, that whose dad was Attorney General. Maybe he'll listen. I don't know to other advice. If Trump tried out his novel gambit, moreover, the torrent of litigation over Gaetz's appointment would ensue. Defendants could challenge every DOJ investigation and prosecution as the work of an unconstitutional attorney general. The courts might well agree. Not only would that hand the administration embarrassing defeats, but the litigation would ensnarl, delay, and possibly undo the very DOJ reforms that Trump seeks. That is frightening. Distracted from his duties by the widespread litigation, Gaetz would lose focus in driving through personnel and policy changes. And the worst case, the Supreme Court could void all of Gaetz's decisions while occupying an illegal recess appointment. Trump's legal program could be set back by 1 or 2 years. President Trump would not be well served by having an attorney general who is preoccupied for a year or more with his own fate. For much of Trump's prior term, Jeff Sessions, his first attorney general, was recused from the quote Russia collusion investigation for having had contact with a Russian official before Trump took office. That recusal sidelined Sessions from the Justice Department's most important business. Sessions would have served the president better by resigning, and Gaetz would serve the returning president better by withdrawing. Yeah, I know a lot of people love this guy Gaetz. I like what I've seen of him, He seems like he's got a lot of testosterone. I'm not sure what that means as far as these accusations against him. Um, I don't know. I know it's Trump's discretion. I'm hoping that Trump has learned, but to some extent, let me remind you of something I said. I said this almost 2 weeks ago, the Friday after the election. I said that you might be afraid that they're going to screw it up, and I said they will, but the screw ups don't mean what you think they mean, and I'm going to stick by that. I'm just going to remind you that I said that. They are going to screw this up, but you should expect that. And the screw up doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean it's the end. Okay. These things happen. They're part and parcel of the whole thing. This thing is too complicated to have any other result. It's going to be a slog, and you need to be ready for it. Drop your perfectionism. That's what I said. You know, stop being a poopy pants. If you have a better nomination than Gaetz, great, but it's Trump's decision and it's also the Senate's. And so that's the way it is. So there might be a fight within the party on this. I'm hoping that the that we eventually get such a deep bench that we don't need to have these fights to the degree that we have them. Thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. Get John Yoo's book, Defender in Chief. Get it by John Yoo, Defender in Chief, Donald Trump's fight for presidential power. It's an excellent book. It's published by All Points Books, New York, and it's copyright 2020. Chapter 2 is about enforcing the law. Chapter 3 is about the revolt of the bureaucracy. Chapter 5 is about Trump and immigration. Chapter 6 is about foreign policy. Chapter 7 is about war. Chapter 8 is about the judiciary. Chapter 9 is about impeachment. Excellent, excellent, excellent book. We covered this with some meatiness and depth on the podcast in 2022 with the author, John Yoo. And I would highly recommend that you follow John Yoo on social media because he's posting a lot and he does a lot of writing. And I thank John for coming on. John was a friend of my mentor, Michael Uhlman, so it was pretty easy to get him to come on the podcast because all he said was any friend of Mike's is a friend of mine, so he came on right away. All right, guys, I'm going to stop this here, and I wish you good November 20th, Wednesday, 2024. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'm supposed to say this. Now more than ever, it's important to support the Republican Professor podcast. Venmo at the Republican Professor. You can also buy me a cup of coffee. Buy a cup of coffee. Lucas J. Mather. I'll put the link in below. But Venmo at the Republican Professor. We appreciate your support, even if it's a small donation or a large one. I know there's a relative terms, but every single cent is used well. And we'll see you next time.